Hi everybody. Sorry, I don't know why, but I'm a little bit nervous today, so I'm just going to keep drinking water to calm myself down. Yes, so can we use my laptop if that's okay? Because I just realised that you don't have the font that I've been using and it's going to look really weird. Sorry. Yeah, it's waiting on the screen to start. So I've been using Agent CFB. I'm into Agent CFB font lately, so sorry about that. Ah, there we are. Does this work? Right, okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about two research games that we made for an academic client, which was about a year ago now, when we first actually started working with this client. So we made two completely bespoke research games for them. And as an academic client, we were really expecting that the team of professors and doctors and trained statisticians that we were working with would want to use traditional research methods, but actually they literally Googled gaming with research, found us, and then sent us a Facebook message to say, hey, can you help? Because they were very aware of all the issues that come with using traditional survey research methods. Is this working? Oh no, this one doesn't work. So just to kind of give you an idea about what we try to do, I'd like you to put your hands up if you would deem yourself to be a helpful person. Someone would help somebody in a time of need. Yeah, so quite a lot of people. Well, that's very interesting because I think you're all bloody liars. Because studies have showed that people who predict a certain kind of behaviour actually in that situation more than likely will behave quite differently. So in terms of kind of crowd behaviours, under 5% of you would actually help me if I was to faint on this stage. So all of the people at the back there that put their hands up, I don't think you'd be coming to my rescue, and this is what science tells us. And so back to the laptop here. What we try to do in our methodology, it's not just about gamification, it's not just about kind of pointifying things and trying to make it fun, although that fun is part of what we do. We try to set up scenarios, so we're not asking people to predict what they would do in the future, but actually watch how they are behaving. So rather than saying, well, you know, what do you think that you would do? What do you think that you would buy? What do you think that you would say? We're setting up a scenario to watch their behaviour unfold. So the whole point of that is to kind of stimulate memory and simulate experiences so they can really kind of feel what we're asking them. And we use music and sound effects to evoke emotions as well, and those emotions lead to different kind of decision making because we're always told that we're irrational people, and so what we think that we will do is different to what we might actually do. A really good example I can give you, so many traditional surveys tend to ask mothers with babies what kind of products that they would buy in the supermarket, what kind of discounts that they look at in the supermarkets they're at, whether they're in Walmart or Asda or Tesco, wherever they are. And so a discerning mother in time of recession will surely answer in this survey, well, of course I look at all the discounts, and of course I look at the special offers that are on in the supermarkets. But in reality, when a very busy mother has a screaming child in her trolley and is probably already late for an appointment somewhere, is making very different kinds of decisions. So not only are her decisions different in terms of what she buys, but her behaviour is different. How she's physically moving around a supermarket also changes because suddenly she has all these other real-life variables that are changing her behaviour, changing her decisions. And that's what we try to do in our research games. We try to simulate an experience for people and see what they do and what they say. Traditional research has many issues, as you know, we've spoken about today, and Ray chaired a conference earlier today, and some of the people on the panel were talking about those issues. And so we have, these are just some of the issues. I know Mark has probably about 100 of those yellow tickets with typical research issues written down on there. But I used to study pattern cutting, and I was very interested in the construction of design, in the construction of women's wear design, and I've always been quite a creative person, but I've been interested in the function of design and how to build good design. And so from a user experience perspective, when I look at traditional surveys, actually there's quite a lot of user experience issues there. I mean, there's quite blanked out survey at the background here, but you can see that very dissatisfied, dissatisfied, somewhat dissatisfied. The word itself is split across two lines, and you've got these radio buttons that are quite hard to use, and we know that from studies like Dangerous Questions, Sexy Results, which was a study produced by Bernie Malinoff. And so we have, these unfamiliar looking interfaces that people deal with. People of all ages are not used to seeing the internet, web interfaces look like this anymore, but they do exist in research. And we have this, this interface that actually only fails to alienate participants because, again, they're so not used to seeing interfaces that look like this. People are so savvy with user interface design now that this kind of interface takes them aback somewhat. And there's also quite a robotic tone in the way that we ask our questions, and unfamiliar linguistics, and overall poor user design from all perspectives. And these are just some of the other issues that we see: low response rates, low completion rates, issues with straight lining. But one of the big things that people don't tend to talk about quite openly is that all of this stuff actually is very detrimental to business. So you've got lots of panel companies who buy panel from each other, therefore depleting competition and creating homogeneity across all panel companies. It's almost like me buying a pizza and someone slipping in a slice in there from Domino's when actually I've gone to Pizza Hut. And so you have an industry that's starting to confuse clients and starting to confuse participants. Where is the unique selling point of panel companies if they're just buying panel off from each other because they can't get the amount of completes that they've promised their clients? And so people have tried to think about solutions for this, and gamification is one of them. Just one solution out of many solutions to increase engagement, decrease those dropout rates. But my problem with some more interesting survey designs is that there seems to be a lot of design for design's sake. And I like to use this woman's coat as a metaphor, which really incensed me when I was sitting on the train. Having a background in pattern cutting, I kind of looked at this woman's coat and I just thought, what is the purpose of that little bit of fabric? What function does it serve? It's not a belt, it's just a fabric with two buttons there, and it serves absolutely no purpose. And I just sitting there, just staring at this woman's behind, thinking, of all of the coats that would have been manufactured, wouldn't the material, the buttons and the time and money being spent to put that little bit of fabric there being used in more functional ways and more interesting for the wearer? Perhaps faux fur in the pockets to keep her hands warm, or some faux fur around the collar to keep her neck warm. It could have been a number of different things that were more functional. So I was thinking, why is this there? What function does this perform? And I was thinking that that relates quite a lot to what we do with research, because I think about how how people create these different designs, and sometimes it can end up confusing the respondents because they don't really understand what's going on. So when I was looking at this woman, I was just thinking, well, what is that piece of fabric for? Is it a pulling device of some kind? But I thought, well, maybe it's a lifting device, who knows? And like I said, just thinking about the time, money and effort spent on just that one little bit of fabric echoes in what we do with research. Because I have literally seen companies say, oh my God, why don't we make the cursor into a bee? Look, but what function does this perform for your respondent? Does this help you gain more accurate data? Is this more, it might be more engaging to the participant, but to what end, to what purpose? I don't think that that's gamification, and I think that's where gamification gets itself a little bit of a bad name, because this is the kind of stuff that some companies are doing, albeit other companies are doing really fantastic things that we should take notice of. But the companies that are just doing design for design's sake can give gamification a bit of a bad reputation. What it should be called is surveytainment, and that does have its place in research, where people have decoratively visual surveys can increase engagement, but there's such a wonderful amount of extra engagement and richer insights that making a survey into a game can bring us. So surveytainment is not a game, but still can increase engagement. So you might be sitting here thinking, okay, smart ass, well, what do you do? Without sounding like a sales pitch, and I like to think that I can look at these things quite objectively, We use story, and I think that's something gamification really misses. We know that a lot of loyalty cards are deemed as gamification, but when I go to Nando's and I get the other stamp checked, I don't feel like I'm playing a game, although industry tells me that's gamification. But I know when I'm playing a game, I can feel it, and I think that's where we get confused with this gamification. We know what a game is, we know what it feels like to play a game, just call it a bloody game. And so I think that the element of narrative is what makes the difference between gamification and a fully fledged game. And so we can use real and metaphorical narratives within a research game to get to the truth of how people think and feel and what they will do. But those narratives relate to the research objectives. There is a reason that we have used them. There is function in that design. And those narratives and the characterizations that we use evoke emotions. And some of those emotions might be emotions of stress or joy, but they're important to the study and they're important to our client because it takes the respondent into a different kind of context. So the data that they see back, they understand is more accurate because they understand that the emotions felt were more true to life. And so across the course of 3 years and writing papers and working with students who are developing their thesis in research gaming as well, which is nice to see, we've developed some best practices. And when I literally sit down with a pen and paper and I'm storyboarding a brand new game, these are the things that I go through with all of my clients, and we call this RECARB. We look at the research objectives, the age of the audience, the culture of that audience, and the client's analysis needs, and of course their budget, to come up with a creative, functional design that will serve the purpose of the research. I gave an example when Mark Earls was talking before about one of the things that is wrong in research. I was given a traditional survey to gamify for 7 to 10-year-old children. And I looked at this thing and I thought, surely 7 to 10-year-olds won't get what's being asked here. And subsequently I did a face-to-face comparative study with children aged 7 to 10. And I found that the reading and writing abilities between such a small age group varies hugely, even though there's only a few years difference in gap. And so understanding the age and the culture of the audience is so important when you're doing something visual and creative, and especially when it's a game with a story. But what we do is gaming, and we evoke emotions, but there's a lot of things going on in the background that you don't immediately notice or you see. And I'll be showing you some footage of gameplay, hopefully if I have enough time. We use all of these things in our design. We use semiotics. We understand how different colours might evoke different emotions and relate to the story. Understanding the power of audio, we use music and sound effects, and I've identified 6 uses for the use of audio, with or without gaming. Even in traditional surveys, there's 6 uses for music and sound effects. Just a couple of those are to control the speed in which people respond. Sometimes you want people to give you more quick, less deliberated responses, and music can help. And music can also help put people in a different kind of emotional state. And we see that in some morbid areas called thanatology, where music can help people come to terms with death and aid a more comfortable death. That's just one example of how music is used, but we all know that when we listen to music, we can feel differently, and that can really help in research as well. And things like game flow, game theory, the user experience, creating graphics. A lot of what you're going to be seeing today, I've done myself with my team. The programming languages that you use as well. I still speak to so many companies that use Flash. You can't use a Flash survey on a mobile device, and I think it was Melanie who was talking earlier, but well, that's where the participants are. They're on mobiles. Why wouldn't you build a survey that can be accessed on mobile? So we take all of this into account. I'll call part of what we do smart intuition and meaningful creativity. So I spoke about design with function earlier, but that smart intuition comes when I'm thinking to myself, how would I feel if I was immersed in this story? And I give that to my colleagues and our play testers, and they let me know how they're feeling as well. And so while what we're designing is often on intuition, it's after years of trial and error and study and experience that means that we can design in quite an accurate way when we first launch. So Imprints Futures is the client that we worked with. Imprints Futures is a 3-year academic study looking at identification and authentication. Now, and in the future, commissioned by the Home Office and Homeland Security. So quite high-end, very serious stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, I was quite surprised when they had come to us, but they were very honest. So Professor Liesbeth there, who's on, the, on your left, and Dr. Georgina Turner, they were saying that they were really tired with the kind of responses they were getting in traditional surveys. And not only that, but they were aware they had something like 85 statements across the entire survey and lots of futuristic forms of identity that had to be tested. And so they were quite aware that in a traditional survey, people would get quite fatigued quite quickly. So I'll be very quick. So this is Professor Liesbeth in a cameo role here as the interrogator. And so what we did as just one example, she had lots of different statements which would group people into different kind of areas relating to her academic work. And so what we did was say, well, why not guise this as a personality test, as an interrogation, as part of the storyline? And because it was all about identification, your character was an undercover agent, so dealing with lots of themes around identification and anonymity there as well. And we've subsequently written a paper that's very recently been published in the Sage Book of Methods, and looking at the taboos around those futuristic forms of identity. People thought very strongly about it, so we had to be very sensitive with them, because some futuristic forms of identity start relating into issues around religion and culture that people feel very strongly about. So we had to be quite sensitive with the narrative that we had. So I'll wrap this up very quickly. So we started off with a couple of storyboards, gave that to the client to just say, okay, this is the kind of narrative we want to use, this is the kind of fonts that we're thinking, colour schemes, characterisation, projective techniques, scenarios, this is how we're going to time it, this is the behavioural data that you're going to get. And subsequently produced tests at undercover agents and dubious. And there was a 4-month gap between the two research games. And although there was a 4-month gap, we had an 81% recall rate when the panel company we worked with only predicted a maximum of 70. I'll just ask them to play that for a few seconds just so you can kind of get an idea what the participant sees and feels and hears. Feel free to fast forward it a bit just to kind of get a gist of some of the levels. So immediately you're immersed in the story. You're an undercover agent, there's a threat. With every story there is trouble. And so you'll see, as Ed back there forwards this on, it's still a recognisable piece of research. There are still questions being asked and answer options being given, but just done in a structure that's much more interesting and engaging for the participant. For anybody who wants to see the whole thing, the slides will be made available. So if you want to stop it, I'll just pass you on to Dubious, the second game. If you want to stop it. And if you play Dubious, which is the second game. So that first game tests are focused on forms of identity and authentication, how people feel about those in the present tense. But my client also wanted to know how people feel about futuristic forms of identity. So we had this game called Dubious, where you could make an avatar of yourself and choose the gadgets and forms of identity that you think that you would use in the year 2030. And so in the story, you were living in the future, but you've come back in time, and you've got to convince 3 people that you're from the future. And the only way that you can do that is by answering their questions. So you can see, as I'm telling you about this and what you're seeing on the screen, the story always relates to the research objectives. So you can stop that there. Thank you. So this is an example of watching how people behave when they're given the ability to make choices without you saying, what do you think you'd wear? Why not dress yourself as if you were living in the future, and we can watch what you're going to choose to wear instead? That's another example taken from the Dubious game. So we're at the end of the slide now, so just give you some idea of the results. So across the 2 research games, over 90% of the participants gave us positive feedback, and Professor Liesbeth Van Zulen and Dr. Georgina Turner were absolutely elated with the kind of feedback that they could give their client. I mentioned earlier we had an 81% recall rate with a 4-month gap, which was pretty awesome. And I tried to look at these things objectively, but it's really hard not to get excited. And what was really nice is that 91% said that they would play a research game again. That made me feel very confident, because if people have a good experience taking part in research now, it's likely they'll take part in research in the future, whether it's with RTG or not. It's good for everybody. And we had a diary study at the end of the dubious game, which was completely optional. It was clearly written, write or skip. And we had 19% of the participants take part in that completely optional diary study. And although my client didn't mind at that time that it was skippable, she was glad that we put it in there, because the verbatim that she had for that was quite crucial in her reporting back to her own clients. So I know that we've run out of time, but here are just some comments from people. Very, very positive feedback from participants of all age groups. So across the 2 games, we had 18 to 65-plus-year-olds. And our eldest ever respondent is 89. And so I think that debunks the misconception that these games are only just for kids who might relate to gaming. Here's some quotes here from people aged 65+. As you can see, still very engaged. So again, it really doesn't matter of the age. People still want to understand their contribution to research. They still want to enjoy themselves. And a lot of people were talking about it as an experience. So I'll just round up there. Thank you very much for your time, and sorry, Nadine.